Hello, and welcome to the first live stream of the Little Knowledge podcast, where essentially me and Goff try things out, mess things up.
Yeah.
But in the long run, the idea is possibly to do a monthly live stream where we can talk about some of the latest news that might have affected some of the historic properties. Also, we can take your comments in the chat room attached to this in real time. And it'll be a quite relaxing experience, hopefully. What better way to spend a Saturday evening, Goff, than rattling around with us? How are you, by the way?
I'm fine and dandy. Thank you. It's very nice. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Hope you're going to join us. It's very nice to possibly see you there. Yeah, this is a whole new thing, isn't it, for us? We've never done this before, so see what happens.
We've had a few little hiccups every now and then because I'm really that chandelier is brighter than it looks.
Yeah,
and because I'm directly under a light, sometimes you've got this. There it is. It looks as if, as you said, you could see my brain as you've got this little glitch. And of course, Goff and Goff tonight, of course, is just a big old face.
Yeah, I do it to be a man trapped inside a fish aquarium, isn't it? Yeah, jammed up against the glass, trying to get out.
But it's absolutely fine. So yeah, that's the idea. It's in a way this feeds into what I wanted to begin with, because it wasn't just us wanting to lecture people about history during lockdown. We both did, I think, got interested in all kinds of historic properties and the stories and the tales, but very rarely did we profess to be experts at that particular property. We always wanted to find out a bit more, and we have had feedback from viewers, haven't we? Various videos.
Yeah, lots of lovely comments and feedback, and people frequently give us extra little bits of information, or particularly if we touch on a property which has had a function beyond its sort of life as a home, a stately home, has become a school or a hospital or something like that. People talk about memories of family and things that have been there. We've had some lovely feedback from people getting in touch with us, trying to track down descendants of some of the families because they have artifacts belonging to them, or one lady particularly been working on a restoration of a horse-drawn caravan which had belonged to the Phillips Company, etc. And so that's been really lovely. And you've been able to get them in touch with people, and we look at the comments that we get under every podcast, and it is nice. We've had a lot of very, very interesting and supportive feedback as well, and something that generally adds a little something to the story or asks a relevant question that we hadn't thought about. And it's been really good.
Yeah, and with the live streams, there's always a chance of not just answering questions as we speak, but also even maybe occasionally getting guests on as well. It's very easy to do it during a live stream, so a bit more relaxed. And we'll be chatting about all sorts of things. We'll do our first news. I haven't got a decent title for this segment, Goff, but it is the news bit where we have a little look at some of the.
We need at least a theme tune. What if I sing like a da 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 da?
All of a sudden, Goff, I fancy popcorn and a drink on a stick. But let me show you what I mean, because a few things have happened connected to some of the 30 or so properties that Goff and I have talked about over the last sort of 18 months or so. And let's get the first one up. Okay. Now, our last full podcast that we did was about Hensall Castle. And at the time, we were ahead of our time a bit, Goff, because we showed this photo. As you can see in the insider, they have now completed the refit. So they now have 23 bedrooms inside the castle that you can rent out. This is completely new. I didn't realize they've only just completed the refit, and we showed some of the photos on our previous podcast, didn't we?
Oh God, yeah, we were ahead of the game on the news on this one then.
we were a little ahead of the news.
Yeah.
Now they say that 8 of the rooms are named after castle residents, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I could only name 7. So I don't know if there's Hall, obviously.
Yeah.
Fothergill, where you get a free pitchfork. Crochet, Jenkins, Price, Talbot, Richardson, and for the life of me, I can't think of what their 8th bedroom, who it might be named after. So anyone from Hensel Castle, if you stumble across this replay on YouTube, do let us know who the 8th, and if indeed if these 7 are correct, I'd love to know who the 8th bedroom is named after.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's the first little bit, the Hensel Castle. And you've got to keep an eye on things. Llanrumney Hall, which was one of our earlier podcasts.
Oh, yes.
You can see here, right next to it, they are going to have a new facility built here for ball games. So it's that sort of thing. So here, near the castle, they've got...
Do you mean football or what?
I think it's going to be netball.
Oh, right. Oh, I see. Right.
Yeah, basketball, netball, and five-a-side football. There's something quite interesting that this actually tells me. I didn't know. Did you know they've got a recording studio inside Llanrumney Hall now?
Ooh, that rings a bell now. Yes, it does. That does ring a bell. Yeah.
I missed that.
I knew that, but I think years ago I was talking about recording some of the poetry work I used to do. I think somebody mentioned it then that there was a studio here.
That also would explain the live podcast offer.
Oh, that'll explain it. Yeah.
Aren't we silly? It was a suggestion from someone at Llanrumney Hall that we might do a live podcast from the hall. And Goff and I were working out, how on earth can we do it? You know, what will we need? What kit? But of course, if there is already a studio there, it'll be slightly easier.
I was talking the other day saying I would love to actually do that. I think that would be great fun to try and do. Pick a nice occasion to get around and do it. And I think that would be lovely because they were all been very supportive of us. And it's been one of our higher take-up podcasts as well.
It was. So it seems they are expanding for the community there. Very difficult for Llanrumney Hall because it looks for all the world with this picture. They've got a lot of room, but they really are in the middle of the housing estate, aren't they?
Yes.
Sort of built around it. So space must be at a premium. And this is a very strange story. The Ultimate Resident Evil 4 HD mod is out in February. Now, you're probably wondering what that has to do with us. Resident Evil 4, by the way, was made in 2005. A computer game, a video game for the Nintendo GameCube. That's one for all the teenagers. It was the successor to the Super Nintendo. But this particular game, Resident Evil 4, appears to have quite a following because fans have got together with permission from the company who made it to redo the game with high definition and to improve the graphics. And it's reissued this month. Now, they went back to some of the inspirations for the original game, and one of those inspirations was Raglan Castle. So these people went back to Raglan Castle, took photographs of walls and doorways that were used in the game to retexture them and put them in again as high definition.
Oh my goodness!
Extraordinary. So if you see down here...
Oh, yes!
So he's here, and he's, that's the original Raglan Castle, and this is it in the game.
Oh gosh, so interesting!
So amazing.
Also,
we've got. There's one of the new developers, and at Raglan Castle.
Yeah.
Resident Evil.
You get used to the idea of these properties featuring as sets within films, but not as wall textures in computer games, do you? You don't need or the basis of the architecture of the computer games. That's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well.
So hopefully that goes really well. I mean, I presume it will do because it clearly has a bit of a cult following, Resident Evil 4. I can't say that I've ever played it myself.
No, I'm not a zombie man. Can't be having with it. Can't be having with zombies. I'm all right with every other cinematic monster, but zombies, no.
But not your zombie.
Can't be having with your zombie, no. I absolutely refuse to watch anything with Walking Dead or this, that, and the other. So I watched the very original, what's the very first one? Night of the Living Dead, which is a tremendously influential and important film in many ways. But oh my God, I never watched any of the others. It's too unpleasant.
No, it can get a little bit extreme, can't it? Anyway, so that's a little bit of Raglan Castle where I didn't expect to find it, really.
No, it's astonishing.
And then we have an intriguing one. Church Cockerel Moonpick, something to crow about. Now...
oh dear.
No. This appears in the Ross Gazette, and this refers.
What is it with journalists and puns?
Yeah. Oh, crow about. Yeah.
Every time they do a pun, a journalist, in my opinion. Every time.
But this is a happy story because this cockerel is an 18th century cockerel, and it's on the top of St. Mary's Church in Monmouth. Oh. And it was there for years, and then it was struck by lightning, I believe, and it was damaged. And it was taken down, and it was put away and taken to a workshop in Somerset, I believe. And it was just sort of left there in bits, in a bin.
Oh, gosh, really?
And when they started to restore the church in 2010, the local sculptor, Phil Chatfield, found this cockerel in Somerset, this 18th century cockerel from the church, and brought it back to Swansea, I believe, who did the original, and they restored it. The 2010 restoration, the architect wanted to put a smaller, newer cockerel on top, but thanks to Phil, they got the original one back.
Yeah.
And Phil has taken this photograph recently, but as he says, he actually says it's lovely to see it back because of all the things that cockerel has seen.
Yeah, quite, yeah.
He's looked down on Charlie Rolls. And how does he put it? He puts it. He has seen Charles Rolls. It's seen Charles Rolls fly in his balloon midget from the gasworks. Oh yeah. It's almost certainly seen Emma Hamilton and Lord Nelson when they were in Monmouth.
Oh right, gosh.
And the fact that something like this can end up in a bin in Somerset, completely forgotten about, just in bits before this sculptor finds it and rescues it.
Oh, that's really cool, isn't it?
It's a good little story, that.
Yeah.
And although it's tangential to us, we did do a podcast on the Hendra, which was the Rolls home, didn't we?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's tenuous, but we got there with that one. Now this one. Now, do you remember in the early years? How long have we been doing this? Do you remember the first few weeks of this podcast? The Duke of Beaufort appeared quite a lot.
Oh, Bunter, good old Bunter Beaufort, yeah.
Bunter Beaufort did appear rather a lot, didn't he?
Yes,
and we haven't had an update from him in quite a while until now. And it's an article from the Telegraph. Essentially, it's all about what happens when you let a film crew into your stately home.
Oh, well, yes.
Now, there can be good things such as up to 20 grand a day that they pay for access. From 3,000 to 20,000 is the average that a film crew will pay to, take over your stately home. So you can make a lot of money. You can understand why a lot of these properties have film crews in, can't you?
Well, yeah, exactly.
You've got to make the money somehow. You've got to make the beans somehow. But I thought this was quite fun. Because if we go down a bit, there's Poldark. It's an interesting photo of a horse in a house.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yes. The location manager, Poppy Gordon Clark, described certain owners of stately homes as completely insane. A lot of them. She did Poldark and Sanditon, but endlessly accommodating to film crews. And another location manager, Mark Ellis, pointed out that, yes, I couldn't believe it when the Duke of Beaufort allowed a horse to be ridden into the house during the filming of The Pursuit of Love, which is that Nancy Mitford adaptation last year. People assume the horse is CGI, but it isn't. The Duke simply wasn't precious about it. Dear me. I like that. Do you want to bring a horse in my stately home? Come on in.
Bring it in. Yeah. As long as it wipes its shoes.
I haven't been a few times at Tredegar House. I had to be with film crews. Did you ever do that job, Goff? Did you ever have to?
No, I didn't do that one, though. But no. It was simultaneously interesting and dull, which is what filming is, isn't it? Really?
Yeah.
Lots and lots of hanging about for very, very small moments of intense interestingness.
Yeah, and deadlines tended to be stretched. I think it was Doctor Who. I was at Tredegar House and I was told, well, they're going to finish at 9 p.m. And I only lived down the road, so 9 p.m. was fine. And then at 9 p.m., the manager said, oh, could you stay a little bit longer just till they get this finished so they don't have to come another day? Because it's a big upheaval. And in the end, I remember looking at the clock in the smoking room at Tredegar House, and it was 3 a.m. So,
yeah.
And as you say, deathly dull, because there's nothing you can do, is there?
No.
I mean, you're literally just keeping an eye on them so they don't burn the place down. They're usually very good, especially the BBC. But you're just there unless you're needed. So
but, there is, if I may touch upon a sore point with you, sorry, say what it was, the Barrowman incident, if you remember.
Go on, Goff.
No, you tell it. You were there with the Barrowman incident. Look, he's angry now. Everybody, look, he's
no,
angry.
I'm not at all. What happened was, I'm angry at the result of the Barrowman incident.
Yeah.
Torchwood, which was a Doctor Who spin-off that some of you may remember, we're filming at Tredegar House, and in the cellars there's this rather magnificent door, which actually you might have a chat about on one of these podcasts at one point. It's a very ornamental door. It looks like it's chinoiserie. It's almost Chinese Chippendale, but early 18th century, maybe even late 17th. So it's very unusual. So imagine you're in a cellar and you see this grand door completely out of place. So this was before we were going to start to do cellar tours, or unexplored Tredegar as they were then. Unexplored Tredegar tours. We dragged you up into the cellars, down to the cellars, up into the attics. We did the nursery wing. We did the stable block. We did the game larder. We didn't even supply oxygen. All that in about an hour and a quarter. But anyway, the one thing I was excited about was this door. It was a door that we know led to the spirits cellar in the 19th and 20th century. But why it was so grand, I mean, what that door was in the 17th century, we're still not entirely sure, are we, Goff? But we have our suspicions.
We have our theories, but it's a puzzle.
Theories for another day. So anyway, literally, and then a week later, Torchwood were there, and I had an email from the curator saying, Paul, you know that door in the cellar? It's been split in two. This was literally a week before my new shiny tour.
Yeah, okay.
And that was the centerpiece of my big shiny tour.
Okay.
And what had happened was John Barrowman had supposed to charge and go through a fake door and then stop. Well, he's a big man, John Barrowman, and he went through the fake door and he kept on going and hit this door with such force that he split in two. And so it had to be restored. And it looks great now. You wouldn't know unless you open it and you see the rather modern screws that could have been bought in B&Q on you can't see, but they're clearly new. And to wind me up, I'm sure, Goff, you won't do this when you do cellar tours in a few weeks, I hope. But I know one or two tour guides, naming no names, that do. But tell that story on the tours. In fact, they refer to the door as the Barrowman door.
The Barrowman door.
Over my dead body is it being called the Barrowman door. I saw him once, actually. I was he had a flat in Cardiff Bay once, and purely coincidentally, I happened to be in Cardiff Bay, ringing the bell of another flat. And as I looked to my side, there was John Barrowman going into his, and I couldn't help myself. My eyes narrowed. I'm glad he didn't see me, because he must have thought, "Who is this complete lunatic who is looking at me?" Daggers. So yeah, I suppose it does happen with this sort of thing, I guess. Dear. There we are. And we're back now. Goff.
Seem to come back to a more normal setup.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Isn't that peculiar?
Isn't that something? Now I feel comfortable again.
Yeah, we're back. Yeah, back more or less what we were. Oh, we have to make sure we do that before, I think.
See, we have 3 people watching us.
Do we?
Yeah.
How can you tell?
So they've accidentally stumbled across us. So well done, and welcome.
Hello, 3 people.
Well done, 3 people. Yeah, it is actually now a lot better. I'm sure we'll master this by the time the next live stream we do. But for those 3 people, they would have seen a thumbnail of Godfrey Morgan walking across, on the transporter bridge in Newport in 1906. And I wanted to have a chat about Godfrey Morgan, Lord Tredegar, because he's a fascinating character. And I think it'd be nice to have a little chat about him. And I thought of this because a couple of days ago, Goff and I were in a pub just playing with ideas for a murder mystery, weren't we? And originally the murder mystery...
Seriously researching and preparing, I'll have you know. Playing.
Oh, you know, we wear our knowledge lightly.
Yeah, we were plotting a murder mystery which we're planning for May, which is set in year 1906, which is around about the time, which is the same period that Viscount Godfrey opened the Transporter Bridge. So it's that's why it's was relevant to our conversation.
Yes, and now the murder isn't going to be set when Lord Tredegar's opening the Transporter Bridge, but the same year.
Same year.
I was telling Goff about the speech that Lord Tredegar gave. In fact, let's get him up. Try to get him up. Bum, 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 bum. Oh, hang on, I know what I've got to do.
That's not Godfrey. Ah, there he is.
There he is, yeah. And he made an interesting speech, the 12th of September, 1906. And he made quite an interesting speech about it will bring together the west of Newport and the east of Newport, hands across the Usk that would shake hands, almost as if there was a bit of an east-west split.
Yeah.
They were certainly worried about what would happen. So the Transporter Bridge made a big difference. And they were saying how interesting it was. And Godfrey made a few quips about transportation, that you can be transported, not hanged these days for forgery. And as Godfrey said, it was the one crime that he might be done for because he was very good at drawing or sketching. He said, however, some of my sketches do end up caricatures. But in fact, at Tredegar House, he once did paint a full hunting scene on the riding school wall on the stable block.
I never knew that. How interesting.
Yeah, so he was something of an artist, was Godfrey. And here he is. He also said one of the bridges somebody said the Transporter Bridge is a beautiful bridge. And Godfrey said, well, beauty, we're not always sure what people mean by beauty, but it's certainly a magnificent bridge, including, and he rattled off some of his favorite bridges, including the Crumlin Viaduct.
Yes.
And the Crumlin Viaduct, he was a massive fan of the Crumlin Viaduct. And here we can see it here. And it was amazing, actually.
That is something, isn't it, actually? Look at it. You can see why he made the connection though between that and the Transporter Bridge. Because you tend to think of viaducts as being those stone arch buildings, but of course this isn't. This is a tiny metal structure, very similar in some aspects to the way the Transporter Bridge looks, isn't it?
Yes, you can see what he was thinking.
Yeah, you can see how he made the mental connection.
Well, 1850s.
It's not there anymore, I presume.
No, it's not there anymore. I mean, it was an amazing thing. 1857, it was eventually opened. And there we are. That's a nice little view.
Oh, what an astonishing thing.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Absolutely incredible.
And what I like, I mean, the river is the Ebu.
Yeah.
And it's the Taff Vale extension. So obviously it's Crumlin, so we're not that far from Pontypool. But the first person to go over it in a locomotive was known as Mad Jack Jenkins. Now, they don't know whether he was mad for risking it, being the very first person to cross this Crumlin Viaduct in a locomotive. But before he did it, he had a drink at every pub in Crumlin. That's courage, I suppose.
Yeah.
Every single one, and then he got across.
Yeah, but he got across and obviously didn't quite remember doing it.
Well, they knew it was safe.
He was reliably informed that he did it. God, look at that thing. That's astonishing, isn't it? The train, it's so high up.
It's so high up. And what do you think Goff did in the end for the viaduct? I mean, you can see the time period here. You can see the cars.
Oh, yeah. What did for it?
Yeah.
Beaching. Probably. Was it beaching?
It was beaching indeed. Although it was extremely expensive. It became actually one of the most expensive railways to actually use. So, of course, when beaching came along in the 60s with his swinging cuts, the poor old Crumlin Viaduct didn't have much chance, did it?
No.
And it was demolished in 1906. The last train crossed it in 1964.
Oh, yeah.
And it was demolished in 1967.
Oh, that's sad, isn't it? Look at that. That tremendous structure just gone. It is that is a sad picture, that one, isn't it?
What a piece of local industrial heritage and history there. In fact, I think all that's left, I should have got a picture of it. But here, I think one of those is the only thing that's left, the sort of stone bit here.
Oh, right. Yeah.
All taken away.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I was just curious after hearing Godfrey's speech regarding it. Now, Goff, just for someone who might not know anything about Godfrey Morgan, Viscount Tredegar, just who was he? But just give a little pen pick. If you're talking to someone who has no idea who he is at all, who is this man?
Godfrey was the second Lord Tredegar. He was the second son. He was never expected to actually inherit. And he had a rather close call where he almost never got there at the same time. He inherited because his older brother, who should have been heir to the estate, Charles Rodney, had run off into Paris and become dissolute and died abroad in disgrace, quite young at the age of 25. So Godfrey finds himself heir to the estate of Tredegar. And also at the same point, the same year he more or less becomes heir to Tredegar, he gets sent off to the charge of the Light Brigade as one of the 17th Lancers. And this picture shows Godfrey in the charge on his horse Sir Briggs. Interestingly enough, Sir Briggs was actually his brother's horse, Charles Rodney's horse. So if Charles Rodney hadn't passed away early, Godfrey wouldn't have inherited Sir Briggs, and Sir Briggs wouldn't have got him through the charge safely because Godfrey claimed he owed his life to Sir Briggs. He went from one end of the charge to the Light Brigade to the other. It's 1.25 miles in each direction, being shot at from the front and both sides, and he didn't get a single scratch on him. There was even a point when they got to the guns, because they did actually take the guns at the end of the charge. A gun went off, and instead of Sir Briggs normally turning and fleeing from the explosion as horses do, he charged forward and leapt the gun as a response to it. So that actually got Godfrey into a safe position behind the guns. Because otherwise, if he just charged back, goodness knows what could have happened, you know. So obviously they did eventually take the guns during the charge. They couldn't hold them because so few people had survived the charge on the way up. And then they had to charge all the way back. Cardigan, who was supposedly in charge of the whole thing, more or less got to the other side of the guns, abandoned, sat on his horse looking stunned, and just turned away and galloped back without giving any instructions whatsoever. Now, this leads to some interesting things in later life. When Godfrey survived the charge, he was the oldest surviving officer at the age of 22. And he was wound up in command of what was left of the 17th Lancers. Now, of course, Cardigan comes back to Britain, hailed as a great hero. He was a charge. There was something noble about this, you know, the wonderfully futile effort, which we seem to like every so often in British warfare. And of course, the journalists, this is one of the first wars in which journalists were embedded with the military. These reports start coming back and they paint Cardigan in a very, very different light. And there was one journalist particularly who despised him and said that he never actually even got past the guns. So Cardigan sued him for libel. There's a big libel case. And Godfrey, as Captain Morgan, is actually called as one of the witnesses to say that, yes, he did see Cardigan the other side of the guns. But this Godfrey survived the charge. However, he was then taken seriously ill with a fever and wound up in Scutari Hospital. And after a while, he got sent home through illness. It took a very long time for him to get home. It took about 18 months of him trekking across land. He had a lifelong dislike of sea travel, obviously based on his first journey out there, and he didn't come back by sea. Also, there's a sense that he needed physical recuperation. There are possibly hints of mental recuperation as well. So post-traumatic stress type things. He seems to show symptoms of that in later life, with obsessive cleanliness and things like this. So he comes back to this country about 1856. His father, the first Lord Tredegar, more or less pleads him not to go back because they said he's done his bit. No, basically that's it. He don't go back. So he doesn't return to the Crimea, and he settles down more or less into the life of a heir to an estate. He is very interesting in his attitudes to war. He gives a speech at a cattle show, more or less within months of him coming back. And he talks very openly about the horrors of war and what an army does to a land. And what is interesting, that army he's talking about is ours, not the enemy's, and the devastation that any army creates in a rural environment. But he eventually became Lord Tredegar in 1875. He never married. The young lady he was going to marry, there's some dispute, but he hadn't got replies to his letters, or this.
Yes. Now I wanted to talk about that while
did you? Go on then.
While we're together, chat about it.
Here, yeah. Well, Godfrey was enamoured of a young lady called Mitty, and he said when he set off to the Crimea, there was an understanding that they would marry. Now, whether it was ever formalised into a proposal or not, we don't know. But obviously, Mitty, there's two versions of it. Mitty, was slightly disgruntled because he hadn't replied to any of her letters, but actually he may not even got any of the letters. It didn't appear to. But also, the Bristol papers had reported that he died in the charge. So Mitty seems to sort of slightly follow the money in a way, not terribly admirably, and marries a very much older gentleman called Richard Naylor, who was part of... who's that?
Richard Naylor.
Oh, I've never seen Richard Naylor. Oh, he looks more affable than I thought he would be. I've never seen Mr. Naylor. Naylor was, we only discovered quite recently, was part of the Abergavenny horse racing scene. He was a big horse racing fanatic. And,
massive. He won the Gold Cup. He was huge. He once won a bet at the horses, 100,000 guineas.
Blimey.
He won 100,000 guineas. Now that should be enough to cheer up anyone, but he was not perhaps the most cheerful of characters, was he? From what we can tell.
No, he was. He's a very morose character, quite aggressive as well. But and this is again the interesting thing. Godfrey turns back up, obviously the size of everybody, and probably the size of Mitty that he's not dead. But Mitty decides that she has to honour the arrangement that she's made to marry Naylor, so she marries Naylor. But then Godfrey does something quite interesting, and more or less says to Mr. Naylor that he's not given up on his intention towards Mitty. So basically, they're going to wait for Naylor to die because he's that much older than them, and then they'll get married afterwards. It's an interesting one. Godfrey continues this lifelong relationship with Mitty for well over 30 years. She visits the house regularly. The children visit. Godfrey teaches her daughters to ride in the riding school. He actually even pays eventually for one of the daughters' weddings.
Not the wedding.
Not the wedding.
It's more interesting, actually. I've nailed this down a bit.
Oh, right.
Let's explain this. As Goff said, there are two children from the Naylor marriage.
Yeah.
This is the eldest. This is Mitty Naylor Jr. She became Lady Rossmore.
Yeah.
So this is the eldest. Again, she knew Lord Tredegar very well. And when she was married, Lord Tredegar was not there at the wedding at all.
Oh.
Not there at the wedding at all. Now, interestingly, however, after Mr. Naylor dies, Godfrey pays for her daughter to have a reception at his London home.
Oh.
So that's the first thing. When Naylor's around, Godfrey doesn't go to this family occasion, right?
Yeah.
Yet he's close enough to pay for her daughter to have a wedding reception in Portman Square. Now, intriguingly, there's a second daughter as well that is with Godfrey an awful lot. And here she is.
Oh, I've never seen her before.
This is Mary Naylor. So you've got Mitty and you've got Mary. Now, when Godfrey's love, Mitty Sr., dies of cancer at the age of 52 in 1889 in Monte Carlo, then Godfrey is seen quite often with Lady Rossmore, the eldest, but he was always seen, it appears, with the second child, Mary, who would open a servants' ball by dancing with Godfrey and coming down the back stairs with the rest of the Morgan family for the servants' ball.
That sounds like just a bit of quaint information, but when you understand the hierarchies of families and households at the period, the fact that she is operating like the lady of the house, because that's what would happen. The lady of the house would lead off the dance with the butler, and that she's included as family, that is actually a quite significant public statement on Godfrey's behalf. That is really quite important. Yeah, because so basically, so she's treated as a member of the family and quite an honoured position as a member of the family throughout her life, isn't she?
Yeah. Both the daughters live to a ripe old age. Naylor, by the way, eventually dies 10 years after his wife. So the man that they've waited to die so Godfrey and Mitty Sr. could get together outlives the wife and lives to the age of 86.
Yeah.
So it didn't really work too well.
Yep.
When he died in 1889, though, Mary does get married, but really rather late, to a man called Alfred Straker. And they live Market Harbour away. And again, she's always hunting whenever Godfrey's around, and it always says that Godfrey taught her to ride and all of this sort of thing. And we're starting to think.
Hang on, can I just ask you a question then? So she did marry before Godfrey died?
No, after.
So she married after Godfrey died. She never married. She married
after Godfrey died. Yeah, I think she married after.
That's interesting as well, because she would be quite a good age at that point.
Yeah, she did take a while.
By that point, at all. She must have been in her, approaching 40 by that point easily, wouldn't she?
Yeah. Unfortunately, her husband died in 1924 in a hunting accident. So it wasn't a kind of a happy sort of end. But again, who was Godfrey Lord Tredegar to these two girls? I mean, it seems as if we're hinting at this without actually coming out to say it, because we simply don't know. When Godfrey dies in 1913, he dies childless, so the Tredegar estate passes to his nephew Courtney Morgan. But I do wonder, he appears in he's in one of the because they do say there's that great tale, isn't it, for the census records about David Frost.
Yeah.
Forgive me if I've said it on here, I can't remember, where David Frost invites Nelson Mandela to stay at his house on the night he knows the census is being taken.
Yeah.
So that in future centuries, when people are researching the life of this historic character, Nelson Mandela, they find that he's staying with Sir David Frost. But the census, I guess, can catch you out, right?
Yeah.
And it certainly catches Godfrey staying at the Naylor's residence.
Yes.
I think it's the 1861. And that is actually the year that Mary is born. So,
oh really? And Naylor isn't there, of course. Old Naylor, the husband's not there; he's elsewhere. Yeah. So Godfrey's staying in the house at that point, while the husband's elsewhere.
And we're not just being.
It's interesting, isn't it?
We're not just being scurrilous about it either. This is also based on gossip that aristocrats had at the time. Lord Llanova was terrible gossips, and some of the letters do say quite clearly that Godfrey Morgan is making a fool of himself over Mitty Naylor, whatever that means. And there is all this. They're talking about this sort of thing. There are letters flying around. And we do know, according to this gossip, that Mr. Naylor had suspicions as well. How can he not? Because he hired a private detective to follow Godfrey around to see if there was any evidence of anything untoward between Godfrey Morgan and his wife, but we don't actually know.
He did have suspicions that one of the daughters, one of them wasn't his, wasn't it? I don't know if about two, but certainly he did think that one of them wasn't.
We believe so, but again, that's a line of gossip in a letter, so possibly.
Oh, so it's in a letter that he thought one of the daughters wasn't his. I mean, it's still intriguing.
I think my money would be on.
We will never tie this story down, and again, it is based on historical gossip as opposed to current gossip. But there are suggestive things about the way the relationship operate and the public statements in the way that they behave towards each other, which does mean, if nothing else, Godfrey certainly treated Mary as a daughter, and because he puts her in that position. I know is it out of, and I find that very, very, very interesting. From a psychological point of view, it's interesting nonetheless. I mean, is he holding onto the daughter because he lost the mother? But that seems always you fund the daughters because of I find it all very intriguing.
It's very intriguing.
How she never. I am intrigued that she doesn't marry to such a late age, and it's after Godfrey's passed away as well. So that I find that interesting as well.
Well, it's entirely possible. By the way, those of you who are watching this live. If you do have any questions or comments, do feel free to put it. I should have said this at the start, shouldn't I? Do feel free to put them in the chat so we can read them. And if you're watching the replay, do put any comments and questions in the comments section underneath the video. But I'd like to talk, because again, we've said this, and it's Godfrey Morgan. He might have had an illegitimate child, but that's important historically because of how Godfrey Morgan is portrayed today, Goff. And he's portrayed in a way that sometimes slightly irritates both of us, isn't he?
Well, I think it would have irritated him. You know, Godfrey was a man of no self-aggrandizement or place whatsoever. He's at on one occasion when one of the mayors makes reference to the family's connection to Ivor Hale and says that he will be referred to as Godfrey the Good. And with Godfrey says, I should be referred as Godfrey the Good. Well, I don't know about that. Now that's quite interesting. You know, he's not a man of any great self-aggrandizement. He was a modest figure in many respects, almost like a man in a way who knew his own failings, but he did and didn't pretend to not have them. You know, he was an exceptionally admirable man. He was a tremendous public benefactor and philanthropist, but incredibly generous to the people of and the town of Newport. And he was a very, very much loved figure as well. However, he can sometimes be put up as a counterpoint to his nephew, his nephew Evan, his great nephew Evan. So Godfrey is still Godfrey the Good, and Evan is by implication the bad. So he tends to, if you're not careful, you can turn a very interesting, complex man into a plaster saint. And I don't think that's something. I don't think it's something that he would have wanted. I can't speak for an individual who died countless years before I was even born. But if you look at the speeches that survive him and the comments that he makes in public, particularly at openings of functions of various things, he doesn't strike me as a man who would wish to be put on a pedestal.
No.
Particularly the way his engagement with people, for a start, is the way he operated with local people and things like this. You know, attending the cabman's dinner every year because and I was criticised by the other aristocracy for dining with a cabman, and he said, "Well, I could dine with the Duke or an Earl any day of the week, but I so infrequently get a chance to have dinner with a cabman."
Yeah, just for people who
he was part of a community. In 1905, he got freedom of the town of Newport. He was the first man to receive the freedom of the town of Newport, and he makes a very interesting line about, "I do like to be amongst my own people." No, that's not the local sort of knobs and oligarchs and aristocrats around. It's actually it's the people of Newport and the people of the area and the people of and he sees himself as part of that. Tredegar House was his principal home, again, which he lived in on his own. Well, it's on his own, 22 servants and 140 staff across an enormous estate. But he lived there principally on his own. And that was his main residence as well.
And this is important, isn't it, to point out for people who don't know anything about this man at all. The reason why he's got this sort of sainted sort of reputation, again, partly if you actually look at the money paid and the gifts given, it's safe to say that this man, Godfrey, Lord Tredegar, was probably the single greatest individual public benefactor the county of Monmouthshire had ever known. Purely, if the council wanted to widen a road and it was on Tredegar land, they just asked Godfrey and he'd give the land for it. Land for churches, lands for libraries, he gave the land for the Royal Gwent Hospital, which is why Lord Tredegar was always president of it. He gave land for Bellevue Park, the Technical Institute in Newport with the...
There's a lovely comment he made about that once. He said, "Well, I've recently given a park to the people of Newport, and now they're complaining because the rates have got up."
No. No. It was worse than that. You're quite right, but it was a complaint when he gave Bedwellty House in Tredegar to the people of Tredegar. And they said, yes, as you said, people complained they put the rent up. But Godfrey said, typical Godfrey, he said, "Don't worry. They say this is a white elephant, but if it stays in Tredegar long enough, it'll soon be as black as the rest of the town." So he does have this little twinkly.
But tell about the impact and the beneficial impact that he had is that the the socialist new movement in Newport said that socialism will never thrive in Newport whilst Lord Tredegar is alive.
Yeah.
And even when he died, they held 2 minutes silence for him.
Yeah.
They're the opposite, the political system that they were opposed to, diametrically opposed to. They honoured one of its members with that respect. Now, I find that very telling.
Definitely.
But again, it's about complexity of people. No one is wholly one thing, Yeah, he was a funny man. He was clever. He could be quite sharp on occasions in wit. He wasn't always, avuncular. But he was a real solid human being. And unlike a lot of people in history, you can actually hear him a lot because his speeches were taken down verbatim on a lot of occasions. So you hear the way he speaks and the way he addresses himself. There was a very snotty remark in what's that? In this encyclopedia biography, Welsh encyclopedia biography, is that right?
The Encyclopedia of Wales, I think.
Encyclopedia of Wales. I can't remember that. There's one of the biographical entries here where they make a very snotty remark about the book, The Wit and Wisdom of Lord Tredegar, which only proves to demonstrate that he has neither. Yeah, but if you read that and you understand the history and what he's talking about and the circumstances he's in, it's a fascinating picture into the mindset of a real complicated human being.
Yeah, he got caught up in, if you imagine Tredegar House, this man, not married, of course, although he's writing Mitty a letter every day.
Every day for 30 years.
Again, Mr. Naylor, you've got to have a little bit of sympathy for Mr. Naylor here, however unpleasant he might be. If his wife's previous love is writing to her every day, yes, it might be platonic, but I'm not sure how many husbands would be happy about that.
No.
Nevertheless, he's living there as he gets older.
You also wonder whether he never skipped a letter after the unpleasantness in the Crimea.
Or maybe he learned his lesson there, maybe.
You don't get one every bloody day afterwards. Yeah.
But as he's living at Tredegar House and he's getting older, he's not sacking any servants, really.
No.
They're growing old with him. So he becomes almost this gently eccentric character living at Tredegar House with his brotherhood and sisterhood, as he called the servants. Yeah. And the thing he loved most of all, as Goff said, he loved the cabman's dinner, but he also loved the servants' ball. And again, that's why it is a key thing that the servants' ball, an event that Godfrey held close to his heart, he would often say, another year has gone, not a single cross word with myself and my servants. It could be, of course, that the butler and the house steward does all the dirty business. Yeah. But nevertheless, he grows old with his servants. And there's some wonderful stories about that. There's a time when his valet is clearly getting on a bit. And Godfrey doesn't want to bother him. I mean, but he doesn't tell the valet this because obviously it's a professional pride. If you're a valet to Lord Tredegar, you've worked your way up. So Godfrey invents this coat hanger, a way of putting his own heavy coat on. And it's a marble base. It's solid silver. It has arms either side and a spring mechanism. So Godfrey could put the jacket on this thing, put his arms through, the spring would release and lift the jacket over Godfrey's shoulders, and he was away. But of course, Godfrey invented it. He didn't like change. Everything was old-fashioned at Tredegar House when he lived there. He didn't like to change anything. So one day he gets inside this contraption. The spring doesn't release. It's so heavy because of the marble and the silver. He can't move. And Godfrey is trapped inside his own invention. And he can't reach the bell pull to call the butler. Apparently, Godfrey was trapped for half an hour in his bathroom before the butler turned up to rescue him.
Stamping on the floor is the only thing he could do.
And he says, I've given up inventing after that. There's this idea of him growing old. So when Goff says that the people of Monmouthshire, and especially Newport, are his people, he really does mean that. It is rather feudal, but he does mean that. And by the way, this painting is painted by G.F. Harris, local artist from Merthyr. Yeah. And there's a copy of this that's at Bedwellty House today. And G.F. Harris is indeed Rolf Harris's grandfather, isn't he, Goff?
Yes, he is. Yeah,
Harris. This is the one who moved to Australia.
We are finding a little thing trying to say that G.F. Harris needs to be remembered for his own singular triumphs. It's not his fault that his gene pool got into Rolf Harris. He was a very accomplished artist, a painter in the Sargent School, really.
Yeah. And we got Godfrey here a little bit later on. Again, with memories are important because you've got the shabrack or the saddlecloth of his horse, Sir Briggs. And this is in the new hall at Tredegar House where this is being painted. And his favourite Skye Terrier, Peeps, sat on his lap. Who's also buried in the garden, isn't he, Goff?
Besides Sir Briggs. Sir Briggs eventually came home from the charge and from the Crimea, brought back by Godfrey's brother Fred, who'd been out there a lot younger than Godfrey, about 3 years. He survives and gets home, and he lives for 28, and Godfrey buries him in the garden. It's a large obelisk there still to the day. And when Pepys died, he's buried there beside him with a little stone as well. So his two favourite animals in the garden.
So Briggs, the horse, is interesting because, I mean, near Aintree and race courses, you might get roads named after race horses, but it's very rare to get a road named after a charger. And in Newport, there is Sir Briggs Avenue now. So the horse has had the singular honour of having a road named after him. And there he is. This is a great painting. This is Godfrey as Lord Lieutenant of Monmouthshire with that soup strainer trademark moustache. There's a great story about this. It's such a good painting by Hugh Goldwyn Riviere. And it was paid for by people from subscription. Thank Godfrey for his various things when he got the freedom of the city, and also when he became, and it was also Lord Lieutenant of Monmouthshire. And it had to be, it was painted at Tredegar House, and it had to dry. So they put this painting up against a window in the cedar closet, which overlooked the workers' yard. And one old retainer was walking down below, and he looked up at the window, and he saw this, and he saluted.
Oh,
he thought it was Godfrey.
Can you zoom in on that medal? Yeah, bring it up. We have that medal today in Tredegar House. And it is Godfrey's campaign medal from the Crimea for Charge of the Light Brigade. So that is still there. It's in a glass cabinet in the side hall as you go in.
Which we think
this picture used to hang above. Used to actually hang above the medals cabinet. And it's a shame it's moved off. I don't know why it did. It probably has a very good reason, I'm sure. But it was a pity because you could literally point at the medal in the case and say, there it is in the painting, you know.
And he's well, yeah, absolutely, with the medals. And that medal we think he got from Queen Victoria herself. Because Fred writes in a letter, you know, did Goff, as he called him, get his medal when the Queen gave out a batch of them? And we think he did. Yeah. Like you said, when he came home from the...
Significantly, of course, for me, he is another Goff Morgan.
He is another Goff Morgan.
Yeah. He obviously predates me.
You got the facial hair.
Yeah, quite, yeah.
Yeah, it's good, but like you said, it might have left a bit of a mark, the charge of the Light Brigade and the Crimea on Godfrey, because it did say that in later years he said that he'd never had a happy dream after that he frequently woke with a tear on his cheek, but never with a smile on his lips, which does tend to suggest some residue, I think, some
and he
remaining.
wasn't remotely romantic about war. You read any of his statements. He held the balaclava dinner every year. In the Tredegar Arms at Basilisk, and the survivors of the charge would get together. And if you look at some of the speeches he writes there, he talks very frankly about that day. And one occasion about some regimental dinner, he said, was it, well, I do, what was it now? I don't think I've actually killed anybody, and I do rather hope I haven't. Yeah. And this is in the middle of a load of old boys talking about how many people they'd shot, you know. So it's fascinating.
Yeah, and he also said, however, that he didn't want the day to be forgotten. He liked things like, he liked old days like that to be remembered by the raising of a flag or something. So he would have liked Balaclava Day to be sort of kept on, I think. And things like Trafalgar Day, he was a big fan of that. So he did have that side of him. But he saw real war, didn't he? He'd gone through an awful lot, that man. And there he is on the steps of Tredegar House. Obviously getting on a little bit then. And then the sad day in 1913. This is his funeral. It was a huge funeral. It was a terrible day. I mean, the rain pelted down. But there were still crowds, about 6, 7, 8 deep, that the police had to part. People that wanted to come and see that funeral.
Oh yeah,
But if you were at the
funeral, and there were simultaneous services taking place all over Newport to coincide with the burial service at St. Basil's. And I presume that police contingent had the people that had the ones that had to part the crowds at St. Basil's to actually get the carriage into the church.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, it was. But if you had been at that funeral and somebody told you in 40 years' time the Tredegar estate, it'll all gone, really, you never would have believed them, because at this point you would have thought it had another century at least to run. Yeah. But of course, 1913, you're on the precipice of the Great War, and this is the first major imposition of death duties to hit the Morgan family when Godfrey died, and they're very, very large death duties. I mean, in our money, we're talking millions. By one estimate, the death duties of this time would have worked out to around about 50 million in today's money, about 60 million in 1934 when Godfrey's nephew died. Now, with a changing world, and if you don't adapt your estate, if you've got death duties of that magnitude coming out, and how do you pay them? I mean, not all your fortune's in cash, so you have to sell the land. After Godfrey died, his nephew almost immediately, well, he did two things. One, he bought the largest yacht in Britain, and so there's no cutbacks there. And secondly, he sold most of the Breconshire Tredegar estate to pay the death duties. So it's not easy, I suppose, is it? If you don't adapt to keep an estate like this going for long.
Also, the world's changed. I mean, Godfrey was very much an example of that late Victorian patriarchal aristocracy, and particularly the way it manifested in Wales as well, which still had this concept of retainers and almost a semi-feudal aspect to it in some respects. But his Courtney wasn't that at all. Courtney was an Edwardian at heart, and the world had changed. Basically, the world changed. The world that Godfrey clung on to so tightly in Tredegar House, even refusing to allow electricity in because it was too harsh. So everything
until the very end,
until the very end, Then you got to say, well, Godfrey, in a way, didn't like change, didn't want to change, but the world had changed under him. He was a very, very affable, eccentric anachronism at the end. And when you think about it, that emblematic loss of the Titanic was probably less than a year before he died. And then you get the First World War, and the First World War upends the social system virtually completely. So it's a very Godfrey's the last of a particular type of Victorian benefactor and aristocrat.
Yeah, there's a great story towards the end where he still has a lot of that old spirit, because they're pretty much as we are right now, with people talking, is war going to start in Crimea over the next few days? Will it be Wednesday? There was an awful lot of newspaper sort of stuff like that. I mean, think of Tangiers and all sorts. There would be a war coming, in the Edwardian period, especially the closer you get to 1909, 1910. And so there's lots of alarmist newspapers. And Godfrey picks one up and reads it, and he says, war is imminent. So Godfrey digs out his old uniform, and it fits him. It fits him. He can fit into his old uniform, and he's ready. And at one point he said to the servants, well, at the moment, if there is sort of like what later became known as the Home Guard, a local defence, at the moment, the local defence, they were all officers. So it would have been him and the staff at Tredegar House that would defend us. He would be in charge, and he said it doesn't matter so much about the men as long as I have the women with me. He's happier like that. But the one thing he had a problem was with his sword, the sword that you saw in that painting, because the sword wasn't sharp enough. So what he did immediately was he sent his sword with a servant to take it to the blacksmith, which is in the grounds of Tredegar House. It was near his cricket pitch. So the boy goes out to find the blacksmith, comes back again with Godfrey's sword. It hasn't been sharpened. And Godfrey said, well, why hasn't it been done? He said, I'm terribly sorry, so the blacksmith's at the balaclava dinner. So, but he was certainly missed. It was an end of an era, definitely.
Yeah, it's definitely end of something. And also the family's influence has declined basically by this point. They're not the political force that they were for much of the 19th century. Yeah, times have changed.
But here we are. This is still here, though. This is the statue of Godfrey on his horse, Sir Briggs, in Cardiff. He wasn't that fussed on having a statue, really. He liked the idea of a statue of his horse, Sir Briggs, and he said this is a wonderful sort of testament, a memorial to the talent of the artist, Mr. Goscombe John. And you can still see that. It's still there today, isn't it? But Godfrey, having a statue of him in his lifetime, it's quite a rare thing to have a statue of yourself erected in your lifetime, especially in Wales. Usually you have to die to get a statue in Wales, but Godfrey was there when it was unveiled. So that probably says something about the way the man was regarded in Glamorgan and Monmouthshire and Breconshire. Yep, he certainly left his mark. But as you said, Goff, he's a more interesting character when you know all the other little things. You know, the slightly, whatever happened, clumsiness with the love affair and not letting go and showing that he was all too human. And not, as you say, a saint, which he probably would not have liked at all, would he?
No, not at all, I don't think. I don't think so.
Yeah, so I thought we'd have a little chat about it.
He made that. I mean, you can never tell, really. You can't speak for people who are long gone. You can't claim with any authority to say what they will or will not think. But I think it's a number of comments that he made would clearly suggest that I don't think he would have been comfortable with being placed on a pedestal and worshipped.
Yeah, well, there we are. And you're and he's going to be in your murder mystery, isn't he? It's coming up in May.
Oh yeah, it's all about around that period, around the horse racing set. And we have Courtney Morgan, who is his heir to the estate within it, and we have his niece Violet Mundy in it, and we have his sister Lady Hereford is one of the characters in it, and of course one of our great heroes of the podcast, Reginald Herbert of Clither. Reggie Herbert is making an appearance in it as one of the characters. So, yeah, because the mysteries we write are all very much based on actual historical characters, if not events. Well, this one actually ties in really nicely with an actual horse race, so that's really quite nice. So yeah, so that's planned for me. So you can come in. We're going to kill one of them. That's the fiction part.
See if they can work out who did it. Yeah. No, it's going to be really good fun. Well, we've gone for just over an hour, so it might be a good point to close off the stream. Again, this was very much. Thank you for the handful of people. We've still got 3 hanging on. It got up as far as 5 at one point, Goff.
Good Lord.
One of them might be spam, according to one. I'm not sure what that.
Yeah, there's a very strange one, a sort of Russian one. Can't work out what that is. Yeah,
anyway, never mind. We're hopefully going to come back with all the creases ironed out, maybe hopefully next month. So that's the idea. And you can, you're very willing to join us with questions and comments and possibly insults, and we can interact more. This wasn't advertised at all. So it might have come up on your subscriber field, but it wasn't on the Facebook page. It wasn't, but the next one will be. So hopefully we'll get a nice little crowd in and we can have a chat, me, Goff, and everyone in the chat. So thank you very much. And thank you, Goff, for doing this.
That'll be fun enough. Been nice.
And we shall see you all very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.